Welcome to the Fantasy Source Football Podcast. My name is David A. Arnott, sitting here with Brad Pinkerton. Week 1 is quickly approaching. Actually, I don't know what the definition is, if we're at the beginning of Week 1 and the games are at the end, or if Week 1 happens at the beginning of Week 1. That's a semantic issue.
Let's make it official. This is Week 1
okay,
right
this
now.
is Week 1 of fantasy football season at the very least, even if the NFL doesn't say it is. And so, with lots of news coming in about different players and their availability for Week 1 and beyond in some cases, you may be thinking about who you might need to pick up. I'm thinking a lot of people are panicking about picking Peyton Manning right now.
There's a lot of panic going on for a lot of different of the top echelon fantasy options. And yeah, you mentioned Peyton Manning. You know, now we're talking about not even just Week 1 being uncertain. Mm-hmm. Like, we might be missing him for a month or even more for the season. So if you invested a top, or early 4th round pick maybe on him, that's not looking like such a value at this point, and you really have to look to cover your bases and maybe even think about grabbing Kerry Collins, who should be sitting out there on the waiver wire. But that's maybe the kind of desperation pickup you're going to have to make before the season even starts.
I mean, if your season has not begun yet and you're picking Peyton Manning anywhere before the 7th or 8th round at this point, I would argue that's probably a stretch. But given that he has such an upside, even in 8, 9, 10 weeks of playing, in a great case scenario, you still need to cover your bases by taking another quarterback later on. I'm in 2 leagues, and in both leagues, the Peyton Manning quarterback also selected Sam Bradford late in the draft, just as one of those 13th to 15th quarterbacks that are generally might get drafted. You've got to pick that guy up.
Yep, and if you've already had your draft, you don't have that luxury now. You have to go with somebody like Kerry Collins or anybody else off the wire.
Who else other than Collins are you thinking?
Well, I think then you have to really swing for the fences and go with a guy like Cam Newton. His passing totals just aren't going to be there, but he's got some red zone weapons and both tight ends, Jeremy Shockey, Greg Olsen, so he can get you some points that way, but also his rushing totals are going to add up. I mean, there's going to be a few times where he's going to have to scramble for his life, so those add up, and fantasy owners shouldn't discount that if they're very desperate in Week 1.
Obviously, I think, maybe it's not obvious, but as with Jake Delhomme in his heyday with the Panthers, I think that the same basic rule applies with Newton. If your lead has some sort of completion percentage aspect to it, you really don't want to be going near that. But I think he's going to be throwing a lot of bombs. I think he's going to be running the ball, and if he has a 50% completion percentage, that's gravy. That's got to be the high end for him. Why exactly? Is it the rushing that pushes you over the top for Newton than somebody, other lower end guy like Alex Smith, who you might think will throw 60% completion percentage as he has the past couple of years?
Right. You can look at a Smith or even any other rookie coming in the league. I'm going to take Newton just because of that rushing total is really going to pad his stats and give fantasy owners a little more bang for their buck.
Speaking of runners, we have a little bit of a backup running back situation. There might be an advantage to be gained by picking up some guys who have moved into the backup position that other less savvy owners might not know about.
Yeah, there's a couple of guys that are still sitting on the waiver wire in a lot of leagues, and I'm just not sure why, because they're behind such valuable running back assets such as Arian Foster. And you look around, a lot of guys have jumped on Ben Tate, and they feel like that's the chic pick to handcuff with Foster. Well, that's fine. Maybe if we were talking about Foster possibly missing like Week 11 or Week 12, Ben Tate might be in position to take over that spot. But right now, he still has yet to play an NFL game. I think Derek Ward is a guy that if Foster is going to be questionable for Week 1 and has to miss that game, I think the Texans are going to lean toward Derek Ward, and he's available in far too many leagues right now. That's a guy that you should be picking up.
And given the Texans and Gary Kubiak's recent history, he does not trust young running backs at all. Right. Remember, Steve Slayton had something like 1,300 rushing yards one year, and then the next year absolutely yanked right out after 4 fumbles early in the season.
Yep, that's all it takes. So he's most likely going to lean on the veteran early on in the season if necessary.
What's the situation going on in Jacksonville?
Well, no more Rashad Jennings backing up Maurice Jones-Drew, so now that means Deji Kareem is the handcuff for Jones-Drew owners, and he's also a guy that needs to be owned in virtually every league because Jones-Drew's knee it's a ticking time bomb. You cross your fingers, you hope he makes it through the season, but he's coming off another surgery, and you just don't know how many games you're going to get out of him.
What are you seeing at wide receiver, the guys that you think are being ignored as the bench players?
Yeah, well, a guy that is frustrating, but I still like his upside, is Robert Meacham. But he's owned in less than 50% of Yahoo leagues.
Really?
That's a big play threat in an explosive offense with the number one receiver who is coming off of another knee surgery. I mean, it's one injury away of Meacham being a fantasy star.
I mean, in our standard league that we're playing for the Experts League, we have 3 wide receivers. And you know what? 90% of the teams out there, that third receiver slot is going to be rotating anyway. You may as well play matchups. Go for a big play guy who could get 6 or 7 touchdowns this year, even if he only catches about 40 balls.
Yeah, and at the very worst, I'd love to have Meacham just sitting on my bench waiting for his moment to shine, and I could put him in later in the season. So I think he's definitely worth a pickup now as a long-term investment.
The other guy you have written down here that I thought pretty highly of before the season, was a little bit interested in seeing how it worked out, is Demarius Moore.
Yeah, a rookie in Oakland. Rookie.
Is it Demarius or Denarius?
Denarius Moore.
Denarius. Okay.
Yep, you got to pronounce correctly. But no, this is another speedster. He fits right in with the Oakland Raiders. But he's a rookie, and typically I shy away from especially Raiders receivers, but rookie receivers. But now he's got a chance to be the number one guy there. Jacoby Ford looks like the best fantasy option. But Denarius might step in. He's got, Lewis Murphy's out with a hamstring injury. And really, Darius Hayward-Bay he hasn't shown much. And
just to be clear, Tim Brown is retired, right?
Tim Brown is not available.
Okay, Tim Brown's not available. Just sure.
But yeah, so Hayward-Bay is not exactly going to be hard to overtake, I think. So Denarius Moore, he could be starting, and maybe not quite week 1, but he could have a big game or at least a big catch and start thinking, well, hey, maybe I need a bigger role.
Yeah, just to back up, I'm from the Bay Area, so I read a lot of the local papers there, and the beat writers and everyone who has watched Raiders camp says that Moore has been just eye-openingly good, and that's basically what we're basing this sort of thing on, what a lot of other people who are following it closely are basing it on. The other positions, other than wide receiver, running back, and quarterback, generally don't seem to get much play in fantasy talk. I mean, we talked before the season about how, if you don't get one of the top 3 tight ends, what's the point? You may as well wait. But you know what? This is also an opportunity where you can get an edge on a guy, because if all the kickers are the same and one kicker suddenly makes himself to be greater than everyone else, that's a huge advantage for you. So let's start with the tight ends. Who are you seeing that are perhaps getting a little bit of an edge on the other waiver wire guys out there?
Yeah, and if you're talking about picking up a tight end at this point, you're probably talking about picking up a backup. Right. And it's hard sometimes, depending on your roster size, to justify carrying a backup tight end.
Yeah, I mean, if you're throwing stuff at the wall just because you picked your tight end with your 15th pick, there you are.
Exactly. So that said, I am surprised that Jared Cook is available in roughly half the fantasy leagues out there. This guy is freakishly talented, and they've been moving him all around in Tennessee's offense this preseason. So I think they're going to find him a few ways to get his hands on the ball, and he is a freak. He's a beast. So especially around the red zone, he's going to be a threat, and he can put up some fantasy points in a hurry.
Now, the thing about Cook that I love about him is that there is this sense that he could kind of do what Vernon Davis, Jason Witten, Anthony Gonzalez used to do, which is lines up in the slot, lines up on the line, does all those different things. And you know what? If the Titans are going to be doing the offense that Matt Hasselbeck has done for years, and that, or maybe even setting it up for Jake Locker, either way, the tight end is going to be a target in that system.
Yeah, he's going to have a role, and they've made that clear in the preseason. I think we're going to see him getting targeted a lot early on in the season.
Another tight end you have written down that I was a little bit surprised to see actually go a lot higher than I thought he would go in the last draft I did, Lance Kendricks.
Yeah, this is another guy. He's a rookie, so I'm a little leery of rookie tight ends. But, I mean, at the same time, this is another freakishly athletically gifted tight end, and the Rams are going to use him quite a bit. He actually led the Rams in receiving during the preseason. And the Rams have so many receivers right now. It's going to be a very fluid situation at wideout. I think Kendricks is going to be the stability. He's going to be the constant for Sam Bradford all year.
Don't forget, new offensive coordinator Josh McDaniels has had extreme success running offenses wherever he's gone. The guy turned Kyle Orton into a fantasy relevant starter.
Yep. Now he's not necessarily tight end friendly, but I think that the weapon that he has in Kendricks is going to be too good to just ignore. So Kendricks is a guy that I would definitely stash away for future dividends.
And to wrap things up, let's talk about a defense that might not actually be on your radar, but probably should, given their schedule. And, you know what, I'll actually say Ben Valentine, another Fantasy Source contributor, and I, we're in a lead together. We drafted this team. We made sure to get them. We're planning on dumping them later in the season. But for the first few weeks, the Arizona Cardinals have a schedule you cannot pass up.
Absolutely. And that early season schedule might actually be good enough to draft him. But they are available in quite a bit of leagues. They open the season at home against the Carolina Panthers and rookie quarterback Cam Newton. There's going to be some hiccups there. So I think the defense can take advantage of that one. You look at next week's, they're traveling to Washington and then to Seattle.
Wait, who are the quarterbacks there?
Well, I don't even want to get into that. This is a fantasy discussion. Let's not get into that. But we're talking about that's 3 offensively inept teams. And then even the 4th week, if you really want to push your luck, they get Eli Manning and the Giants. Mm-hmm. And there could be a lot of turnovers there.
And you know what? It's one of those things where the Cardinals, like I said, you have to go into this with the intention, I think, of dropping them later and trying to pick up somebody else, perhaps even a defense that has already had its bye, and then you can ride them the rest of the way.
Yeah, don't fall in love with the Cardinals' defense, but at the same time, before you're just flat out cutting them, make sure you glance ahead at their upcoming schedule to see if maybe they have another run of those weak NFC West opponents.
All right, so those are some guys that you might look to pick up if you're in especially dire straits, or maybe even just keep an eye on and see if they stay on your waiver wire through the first couple weeks of the season.
It's never too early to start scouring the waiver wire.
Thanks, Brad.
Thanks a lot.